the More Than Anxiety podcast. I'm Megan DeVito, and I help ambitious women break out of the anxiety cycle that keeps them frustrated and stuck. Get ready for a lighthearted approach that will change what you think, how you feel, and what you believe about yourself. This podcast is full of simple steps, a lot of truth talk, and inspiration to take action so you walk away feeling confident, calm, and ready to live. Let's get to it. Hey there, welcome to episode 91 of the More Than Anxiety podcast. My name is Megan. I'm your host. I am the face behind Megan DeVito Coaching. And today I get the privilege of introducing you to Teisha Gillespie. Teisha is the host of the Not Your Average Go podcast, where she presents her personal journey alongside uncomfortable but critical conversations with average but super incredible and diverse people, hitting on everything from her guests' personal accomplishments and contributions to social impact to some of the adversity they've had to face along the way, resiliency and tenacity, all the qualities they have that got them to where they are today. Teisha believes it's possible to live in a world where difficult conversations can be had without fearing stigma, judgment, or backlash. This is important stuff. This is what this world needs. She is a hope dealer. And I'm so happy to be able to introduce you to her. Enjoy the episode.
I'm very excited to have this conversation. Thank you so much for having me.
I am thrilled to have you. So yeah, how has your week been?
It's been quite challenging mentally. I ended up taking a mental health day on Tuesday. I could not handle all the emotions kind of going on in my brain. And, it was a really nice day, just basically did nothing, watched some TV, took a nap, did some stuff for the podcast. So it was just a really great day to actually unplug from my feelings a little bit. And then I came back on Wednesday and had this entire just like big situation happen where there were a few people feeling disenfranchised in their roles, unfortunately. And I was experiencing a lot of anxiety, wanting to be able to help my team, and also kind of walked this thin line of like senior leadership politicking happening.
Yeah.
And so it's been quite the challenge this week.
Well, it's good for you for taking a mental health day because, so often people are like, I just have to keep going. So good for you.
Yeah. I try to do that for myself. It's not always the easiest, but I also think it's super important when you're leading a team. You need to they need to see you doing it for them sometimes to feel comfortable. Because you can tell them all the time, hey, you should take a day off. You should take some rest. But they never see you doing it. What you do speaks more than what you actually say sometimes.
For sure. And I think that is such a big deal too. And I think we have this really necessary, but it feels like kind of slow shift happening where, people are realizing that, hey, we need to slow down a little bit. This constant, bosses wanting people to go 100 miles an hour all the time. I love it that like just leading by example, right? Like being able to say, hey, you know what? If I'm going to ask you to do this, I need to do it too.
Exactly. Yeah.
How do we pass that down to bigger businesses and corporations? I wonder, like, how do you think we do that?
I think you need empathetic, I think kind of like business coaches, there are specific coaches that specialize, I think executive leaders and really helping them find a nice balance. They say work-life balance, but it really is more work-life integration. Work is part of your life.
Yeah.
And
I like that. I like that term. I don't know if I've ever heard that, and I really like that.
I do too. It resonated with me so much because, I actually like what I do too. So I don't always see them as two separate things. There are sometimes where I take a call or talk to my boss like after hours, and it's never that I feel obligated to do so. And she's never created this environment where it's like, you better answer your phone after hours or whenever I call. Right. But it's, I feel very comfortable throughout the day taking breaks to go for a walk, to tend to my own mental health. And so it's not this strict 9 to 5. And then at 5 p.m. you're logged off. Obviously I do set some boundaries. I turn off, we use this program called Slack for instant messaging during the day. And so I do silence that. I don't respond to emails typically after hours, but I do feel comfortable sometimes kind of bringing that piece of my life into more of my personal time, because I don't feel like it's an obligation. I have to do it all the time. But yeah, I think executive coaches, and I don't know that we have enough of them out there.
Yeah.
When I first started leading teams, I had such a challenge because, I still to this day am somewhat of a player coach. So even though I lead a team and I do a lot of delegating, there are still many times where I step in and, I'm getting my hands dirty and working alongside my team and collaborating with different department, which I personally enjoy. I don't know that I could ever see myself ever kind of never doing anything. I think I would eat 5%, even if it's just 5%, I think I still need to be doing something. But with that, it became very challenging because I'm supposed to be this player coach, but I'm also supposed to help support, 5, 6 people, and helping them not only get their jobs done, but also helping them grow and figure out, where do I want my career to grow? How do I focus on personal and professional development? So it's being there to lead them personally, being there to lead them through the work and the tactical things that they're doing. Then having to step into my strategist role and help actually set plans for my team. And then also having to attend so many hours of meetings and then still have time to get stuff done. And I still don't necessarily have an answer for it. And I don't, I was like, hey, I'm new to this. Why don't I reach out to my former supervisors and ask them how they do it? And they were like, Teisha, I wish I could tell you that I have the answer, but I do not.
We're all floundering together.
We're all floundering. And it just makes me kind of think about, I still sometimes do not feel like an adult. I don't even know what the definition of an adult is.
I'm so glad to hear another adult say that. Like, what's happening in my life right now? Like, why am I an adult child at 48 years old? But yeah, it is a weird thing. Like, I wonder if we ever get to a point where, like, no, I'm 100% adult. I actually kind of hope we don't.
Me too. And I think it's nice knowing that there are other people. I think when you're a kid, you look up to these people and you're like, they just have it all figured out. Or even just as a quote unquote young adult, looking at other people who might be more established in their career, like, I can't wait until I'm there. And I actually understand life and how to be a human and do all the things correctly. And then you get there and you're just like, I'm still waiting to get there. We're just all kind of improving life and trying to figure it out. And you don't realize it, that all the adults that you looked up to were doing the same exact thing until you're in their shoes. And it's just like, who's actually in charge here? Who let me buy this home? Who let me get married? Who let me do all these things? Could I even?
Is this really a good idea? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And so sometimes I feel like that too, when I'm in my leadership role. I'm just like, I think for the most part, we're all just trying to figure it out along the way. And it's hard. And I wish there was a way to be able to manage all the things. And, maybe there's a super smart executive coach out there. If you're listening, please share your insights, because I would love to know them.
Yeah. So when you say, like, if I had an executive coach for, like, what I'm doing, I know a little bit about your podcast. And so share a little bit about your podcast. And then if you want, share a little bit about, how do you incorporate all of the great things that you do on your podcast? How do you incorporate that with, like, your corporate job?
So my podcast is called Not Your Average Goat. And the GOAT is derivative from the sports world, greatest of all time. And I really started the show wanting to showcase incredible stories of quote unquote average people. There's so many great podcasts out there where you hear about celebrities' stories, and they're all very, very great. But I've found through listening through some of these that even though I don't personally have these connections with, actors and comedians and chefs and all of these things, that I do have connections with these incredible average people who have stories that could inspire other people. And so that's really where the initial drive came from to start the show. And I've always enjoyed storytelling and interviewing. Early on in my career, I actually thought I was going to go down more of a journalistic route, and my career just ended up kind of shifting and shaping into something different. But I never really lost that. And over the last 2 years, I'm about to launch season 3 shortly.
Yay.
I've really been able to hone my mission and my vision, really what I'm trying to accomplish. And so Not Your Average Goat seeks to celebrate all the shapes, sizes, and colors of diversity as well as adversity, and create a platform for relatable storytelling with the hope of dismantling stigma. I am a firm believer in the power of just personal journey storytelling and being able to share authentically the diverse human experiences that make up our lives, because I think that it can help other people who might have had analogous or adjacent lived experience to you to feel seen and feel heard, sometimes for the first time in their life. We oftentimes go through these life experiences, the adverse ones especially, thinking we're the only ones who are doing this. And when you feel like that, you don't want to talk about it. You have no roadmap for navigating it. And so I'm really trying to empower other people through these incredible stories. And I'm so thankful for everyone who's agreed to come and be a guest on my show, because we tackle so many hard conversations around mental health, addiction, trauma, disability, the LGBTQ plus experience, race, like just so many topics that oftentimes we're scared to talk about because there's so much shame and stigma oftentimes wrapped around these conversations. And so that's really what my show is about. And I bring on so many different people, and we just have these vulnerable and authentic conversations, really trying to share insights and inspire other people. And so that's really personal to me. I am a person with many different layers, I think, of diverse identifications. First and foremost, I am a female. I'm also a person of color, and I also have a disability. So I have a vision disability. And so there's so many aspects of my life where I have encountered discrimination, hardship. I also manage anxiety, and that's something that people don't see. And it's also something that I try very hard to mask, especially in public settings, because there's a lot of shame. And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about the realness of anxiety. People sometimes think that, just calm down, just breathe, it'll be okay. Right. And it's more than that. It's a condition, and it is very hard to deal with. I mean, your nervous system has a lot of power, and there's, for me, absolutely, especially this interconnection from my childhood. I dealt with a lot of trauma, both in my home, sometimes in my school, some bullying due to being a person of color and also having a disability. And so there's also this PTSD element that comes into play oftentimes, because, I've done a lot of work to try to grow personally, but there are still some things that I am trying to figure out and deal with from my past too. And so there's just so much that happens. And so with my podcast, my personal life, my work life, I'm very passionate about finding spaces where, one, I can be my authentic self, where I'm in an environment that is psychologically safe, where I'm surrounded by empathetic, collaborative people. And so right now I work as a marketing director for an early education nonprofit, and I could not be more grateful for my team. I think, I've really enjoyed working with so many people over the years, but the team that I currently work with is so, so special. We're made up of so many diverse backgrounds, so many unique perspectives, but everyone's just so, so accepting, so supporting. Yeah. And I couldn't say more about my team. And so I really try to create these spaces where I can also give that back to other people. And so through my podcast, I'm trying to do that. And I also do some volunteer work. So I have served in a couple different capacities with the NFB of Virginia, which stands for the National Federation of the Blind. When I was growing up, I didn't really have a role model. There was really no representation. I didn't see other people with vision disabilities, working in the professional world, going to college, navigating challenges in the workplace. Personally, I didn't have that kind of role model or that support. And so even though I figured it out somehow, I don't know how,
Mhm.
I had the opportunity to actually mentor and kind of be that role model or kind of that big sister, if you will, to teenagers and young adults
Yeah.
who also have vision disabilities, and kind of be there to show them, hey, we can figure out how to be an advocate for ourselves. We can figure out how to navigate this whole employment world. We can figure out how to be resilient and independent in our lives, and be able to exist just like any other human being. So that's kind of how I got involved in the NFB. And then now, my career has been in marketing and communications. And
Mhm.
so I have transitioned now to the communications chair for the Virginia state affiliate. And so now I'm working more so to really help get the word out there and help to develop programs where we can actually engage more people throughout the states, and make our offerings more well known. And so I do try to give back and really not just kind of talk the talk, but also walk the walk. And, another thing that I'm really excited about is our organization actually just started employee resource groups last year. So a
Okay.
place for different communities or people with different identities to kind of come together and create this sense of belonging. And so the ERG, or the employee research group that I am a co-chair
Mhm.
for, is called IDEA. So it's Inclusive Disability Engagement, Awareness, and Support. And it's a group of us who have both visible and invisible disabilities, and also people who don't have a disability identity but want to be there to be an ally and an advocate. And so we
Yeah.
come together and really try to create a sense of belonging and a safe space for us to talk about maybe challenges we're facing, but also to kind of problem solve and try to tackle some larger organizational issues that might not be super inclusive right now.
Mhm.
So that's, it's a lot, but I really love all the things that I am involved with.
Yeah. I can tell you love them, and you have so many hats going. But I think that it sounds like there's this almost this common thread of, if we can get people to talk about these things, even though, coming out and talking about, this is what I'm experiencing, whether it's anxiety, or it is, I'm trying to figure out how to come out to my parents, or I'm really struggling because I don't have vision, or I struggle to hear, whatever that is that we're struggling with. It's very vulnerable to be able to step up and say, hey, this is scary for me, and I don't know how to navigate my life right now. So what do you notice from the beginning of a conversation to the end? Like, do you notice a difference in a person's demeanor, or in maybe their emotional presence, I guess, from the beginning to the end? Because there's something so powerful about saying, I'm terrified to have this conversation, and I'm going to do it anyway.
I do. And one thing that I really try to do is make everyone who comes on my show feel comfortable. And so from the
Mhm.
get-go, we don't just dive in. Okay, hard question,
Right.
let's go. And so, one thing, there's kind of two things. So one, I want my audience to be able to relate and see this person, or think of the person who they're listening to as a human being with common lived experiences. And so I actually start all of my episodes by going back in time and say, hey, Megan, tell me about 7, 8-year-old self, and, what were you into,
Yes.
and talk to me about your family and your home life. And so it's really this way to kind of slowly ease into the conversation and to get to know the person more on a human level, and to also make that person feel comfortable. Because I think once we actually get to the harder questions, they're more relaxed. And
Yeah.
I think sometimes by starting off that way, some people forget that they're actually in a recorded conversation. And so
Mhm.
they feel more comfortable being their authentic, vulnerable storytelling selves. And I've had some people reach out to me afterward and just say, or even mid-conversation, they'll just stop and say, this has been so therapeutic for me. I didn't realize like what I was getting into. I know. And I feel, I'm a person who's really never done super well with compliments. I've tried to get so much better at that. But because also I don't want to be the face of my podcast. I want the people who I'm bringing on to be the face of my show. I never, I don't want to be like your Joe Rogan. And so, and so I hear this and I just like, my heart just kind of melts, and I feel so great that I can give that to people and create that space, knowing that they're not just inspiring other people, but in a way they're kind of inspiring themselves by just opening up and having these conversations. And I'm so happy that I can create a safe, comfortable space for people to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And you do, like, I can testify to that when I talked with Teisha on her podcast, and when I was talking with her, we did start with talking about like, hey, tell me about your childhood, tell me about your life. And you're spot on when you say that it's not a traditional, we're going to 3, 2, 1. And I've been known to do that, but it was such a nice experience not to have to say, all right, deep breath, we're going to do this, but just to slide in with the conversation about, hey, how are you? How are things going? Tell me about your childhood. And it does bring that comfort there. And I think that, along those same lines, being able to start with talking about something that is maybe, for me, it felt very safe. It felt very controlled and something that I was comfortable with. Whereas, if we would have talked about some bigger question, it would have been scarier. And when we get scared, when we get into that place where all of a sudden we're really nervous, our brains don't want to work anymore. So the questions are actually harder to answer. So you made it very easy.
And thank you so much. I appreciate that. Over the last 2 years, I've only had to quote unquote throw away one episode because I had someone come on, and I'm very upfront about my mission, and I give people the questions ahead of time so that they're not thrown off guard. But someone just had a very hard time opening up and being authentic. And I told them afterward, I was like, hey, I really appreciate your time, but I was like, I can't publish this episode. It does not feel like you're being truthful and wholesome. And, people are going to hear it and they're not going to trust what you're saying because you can hear it in your voice that you're holding back. And I understand if you aren't ready to have these conversations yet, that's totally fine. But I'm unable to publish.
That's very brave. That's a hard conversation to have.
It was. And it was also someone, I've had more and more people on my show who I don't have these long-term relationship, very personal connections with. But this was actually a person who I've known for quite some time. Ooh. And so, and thankfully they took it very well. They were like, I hear what you're saying, maybe we'll try again sometime. But so I do recognize sometimes how hard it can be just to have the conversations, even though I try my best to create this very conversational space. I like to tell people, hey, like, let's just pretend that we're out having lunch or maybe out at happy hour enjoying a drink, just like you would talk to anyone else in person. Yeah. That's the type of environment I do try to create.
Yeah, and you do a great job because with the people that you're talking with, they're not coming on to talk about their favorite cookie recipe or, what they did, what TV show did you watch last night? How do you feel about Taylor Swift? It's not those kind of conversations. These are big time, very personal experiences and stories. And that comfort level is so important. So what do you think makes you, yes, you're in the middle of it, but I think that, what is it that makes you so good at this?
That's a great question. Again, I think kind of going back to that kind of doing, kind of, saying what I'm doing what I ask others to do. During the interviews that I have, I'm also sharing bits and pieces of my own story throughout. Because like I said, I have a lot of intersections from my diverse identifications, but also the adversities. And that's why I put a lot of emphasis on the different shapes, sizes, and colors, because diversity and adversity can look very different person to person.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the time, there are multiple different layers and intersections to these things. And so I fortunately or unfortunately, however you want to look at it, oftentimes can relate to almost everyone who's been on my show in some way or another.
Yeah.
And so there are many opportunities for me to chime in and actually say, hey, what you just said reminded me of this, or, I can so relate and empathize with what you're going through. I've had a similar situation. And I think that also makes people feel more comfortable too, because they're kind of getting that relatability themselves in real time. And so I try to be very authentic as an interviewer. And I've also, kind of coming on your podcast, I've been trying to do that more as well, because, I'm not often in these situations where the mic is flipped. And so this for me is kind of a way to like practice too. So thank you for giving me this opportunity, Megan.
I'm thrilled to have you on. No, I loved it. And I loved spending time with you on your podcast. And it was so great. And I do think there's, we talk about, you can listen to motivational speakers on YouTube, or there's motivational podcasts, but then there's very authentic podcasts where maybe the intention isn't to be motivating or to be, something that's like, yeah, oh my gosh, but there's something so inspirational about hearing these stories and hearing like, oh my gosh, like the amount of courage and willpower and all of these things that people are going through, that you can't help but feel motivated and encouraged and inspired by these stories. These are the kind of stories that make people grow personally. And I think just even like out in the world. And that's so necessary right now. Like, especially we're just in such a time of growth. And I think that, growth is never comfortable. It's always very uncomfortable and very hard, but it's so necessary. And we need more voices out there doing that.
It's so necessary. And the power of storytelling, it's incredible. And, speaking of being a podcast, the one that actually kind of inspired me to start mine is called Work in Progress, hosted by Sophia Bush.
Okay.
And, I talked about how, I don't have all these celebrity friends. And of course, she being in that world, she's an actress, philanthropist.
Yeah.
She does have a lot of connections, but the way she asks questions, it really brings these people down from these pedestals that we put them on and humanizes them. Yes. And she encourages them to talk about, how they got to where they are. And a lot of times they've had to overcome so much adversity. Like thinking, she interviewed Jewel, and Jewel's story, oh my gosh, she was like living out of a car, I believe, at like 18. And, she turned down so many record deals to stay true to who she is. And there's just, so many like Gloria Steinem and like the feminist movement, and just so many incredible stories that really actually inspired me. And so I get a lot of inspiration from listening to her. Two others, which I also listen to, are A Bit of Optimism with Simon Sinek, and also Adam Grant's Rethinking.
Yeah.
They do such a great job. Yeah, they do such a great job of framing their questions, and also their guests that they bring on are also very authentic. One that really stands out to me that I really, really enjoyed on Rethinking was with Reese Witherspoon. That woman is amazing.
She is amazing, isn't she?
She is. And she just opened up a lot about imposter syndrome. She talked about...
Isn't it crazy to think that Reese Witherspoon has imposter syndrome?
It is.
But I mean, I know that that's a real thing, and that everybody, it's so nice to hear that other people struggle with it, but I'm like, really? Reese Witherspoon?
She talked about, when she did walk the line, she had so many nerves going out on stage and singing. She said that she broke down. She was probably crying more than she was rehearsing when she was doing that movie. Gosh. Yeah. And these are the types of stories that like humanize people like Reese, who we put up on this pedestal, which it's a well-deserved pedestal, may I add.
Sure. So would Sophia Bush be your dream interview? Who would be your dream? Like, you're like, oh my goodness, if I could get an interview with that person, who would it be?
She's up there. I think about this all the time. Like if someone just came up to me and say, hey, you can invite 3 people to dinner tonight, who would it be?
Yeah.
Sophia would definitely be one of those. Mindy Kaling as well.
Oh, that would be a really fun
her.
one.
Yeah.
Did you read Is Everybody Hanging Out Without Me?
I did.
Her book. I loved it.
It's so good. And oh my gosh, she's just incredible. I think most people forget that she, of course, played Kelly Kapoor on The Office, but she was on The Office first and foremost as a writer. And then the Kelly Kapoor character got created and she stepped into that role and still continued to write. And then she wrote on the next show, I can't remember, but then she produced and wrote Never Have I Ever on Netflix. And she's just incredible. So incredible.
Yeah. That would be a great one. Those fun questions like, who are your top 3 people? Who do you want to have, if I could go to dinner or have wine with somebody, who would be on my list? I mean, oh my gosh, it would be dreamy. Yeah.
Yeah. I think Trevor Noah might be my 3rd.
Oh yeah, that would be a good one too. That's such a fun perspective that he brings, and so much humor too at the same time.
Yeah. I got to see him live back in January. So good.
That would be really fun. Yeah. My number one is always, this is so funny. Like my number one is always Michelle Obama. Always.
That's a good one.
I just want to go. I don't even care if I just go sit in her backyard and drink a glass of wine for a half an hour. That would be a dream. Like I just want to pick her brain. And I think she's fun. That would be so fun. And then Selena Gomez. I have a lot of respect for her. Yes. I have so much respect for her as like a child actor and really coming out where she did. I feel like so many child actors don't come out in a position where they're not, they're just, some of them are just destroyed. And I know she's got a lot of mental health issues, so that's part of it as well. I would just love to hear her story, like how she handles it. I think that she's pretty open with it. She's got Wonder Mind, which I think is such a cool publication. But yeah, it's funny. They're very different people. I don't know. Michael Phelps.
Interesting.
Phelps,
see, that's an interesting one for me because here, I grew up in Maryland. So Michael Phelps was like a big deal.
Yeah, for sure. Or maybe his coach. Maybe, well, I know. No, I would love to talk with Michael Phelps. Again, the mental health thing, but the just so many stories. Well, because I was a swim coach for a long time and my kids were swimmers and I was a swimmer, so I would love to pick his brain on so many levels. That would just be interesting. But okay, so that was so good. And then if those are your dream interviews, like, are you open to more interviews? Are you looking for people to come on your podcast, or are you kind of like, how do you find the people that you want to interview?
I am open to people coming on my podcast. I still actually have a few slots available for season 3. So as of right now, because I also do a full-time job, I do 12 episodes per season. And so I vet people very, very quote unquote strictly, not to scare anyone away, but I want to make sure that everyone aligns to my mission and my vision. And so most of the time, when I first started, most of the people on season 1 were personal connections that I had. Season 2, kind of half and half personal connections, but I started branching out and making connections through LinkedIn. And now that we have Threads, a lot of people who are going to be appearing on season 3, I've actually met for the first time on Threads, including yourself. And so I'm just so fascinated by how this platform has really empowered different content creators, including myself. But I'm also, I would love to understand how, people like you, you're now going over 100 episodes. Like, how do you find your guests? Because I'm also just like, I need to learn from these other people who have like 100, 200, 300 episodes. Like, how do you do it?
I don't know. Sometimes I wonder. So I really didn't start doing a ton of interviews until recently. Like I had done a few, like a sprinkle here and there, but it had mostly been me recording an episode a week based on, stories of clients that I'd work with, if I had somebody where we had a really powerful coaching session, that just always, I feel like I get a theme of the week where it's like, oh, everybody's coming to me with this issue this week about anxiety, whether it's perfectionism or overthinking or overwhelm, whatever it is that they're coming for the week. It's like, it just becomes a natural topic for a next podcast. But same thing with you. Like, I put out a post on Threads, like, I want to start doing interviews. I would love to, if you have a story about mental health, if you have something that you do to help people deal with stress and anxiety, any of those things, I put it out there, and it was instant, like, I mean, people are looking for, I think, this out to be able to talk about what they do, but also to share their stories and to just say, hey, this is how I help people. This is what helped me. And I think we're just in a really great, again, that place that we're at with change and growth, and people wanting to say, hey, you guys can do this, and encourage each other. So that's really the way I did it. And I love it that you can also go out there and say, hey, I want to be on your podcast. And again, people swarm to it. So it really is a great place to be able to find those interviews. But for me, right now I'm in a place where I'm doing an interview and then a single episode, because I really enjoy the interviews, and I really enjoyed being able to sit down and share maybe a little more how-to in between. So I have a back and forth platform. So that's how I do it.
A nice mix. And I give you a lot of kudos and other people who do those solo episodes, because I don't think I could do it. I've tried recording myself for different things, and I was like, I do not feel like I'm talking, very authentically right now. It's very, very hard. And even if I pretend that there's someone sitting there, I think I would physically have to actually torture someone and say, you need to sit here while I record this solo episode, because I need to have a person here for me. So I definitely give you and others who do solo episodes so much kudos, because I think it's hard. It's harder than I think most people think it is.
I think that I probably talk to myself all day long in my house. I know that my kids have been like, Mom, who are you talking to? I'm like, leave me alone. I'm talking to myself. So maybe I just naturally do that. That probably means something. I don't know what it means, but yeah, and it does for me. I think it helps for me to picture the person who I'm talking to, maybe. Like, if it is, if there's somebody that I'm like, oh my gosh, I know this conversation, if I can picture it as maybe as like a coaching call, if I picture as, okay, this is what I would say. Or if I were talking to my kid, like, I could kind of picture it that way. But it is awkward. If I overthink it, it's terrible. If I have a week where I think about it too much, I might have to record it 2 or 3 times, just because I feel so weird about the way it came out. But
yeah. And I too, one thing that was so hard for me when I first got it started was listening to myself, because I do all my editing. Yeah. I unfortunately do not have the budget to hire someone to do that. I wish I did. I do too. I do all my own editing too. And it's so weird listening to yourself. You sound so different. And it's actually scientific with the reason why you sound different versus, in your head, you sound different versus when you listen to your recorded self. And it was something that took me a little bit of time to get past, but I fortunately only had to listen to myself for 30 to 60 seconds at a time, because most of the time it was the other person talking. So having to then edit a solo episode where I'm talking for the entire time, that would be a challenge.
It is weird. And you start noticing that, for me, I never realized how many times I say the word like, until I listened to myself, and I thought, you sound ridiculous. I mean, I sound like a teenage girl. So it's funny. Yeah, you can get a little judgy on yourself with the things too, where I'll think, how can I delete all of these likes out of this episode? I'm trying to be very intentional about not saying it as much, but it's hard. It's a difficult thing to change, because I don't think about it if I'm not recording a podcast. I'm sure I'm just talking like I would any other time, which is also kind of embarrassing now to think about it. But, oh goodness. Well, I have enjoyed talking with you so much today and last, just a couple of weeks ago when we talked for your podcast. And is there anything else that you would like to share with people to let them know how they can, where do they find your podcast? And what do they need to know about you so that they can connect and get the support maybe and the inspiration that they need, because you have so much of it to give?
Well, thank you. So my podcast, you can find it on most major podcast platforms, Not Your Average Goat. We're also on Instagram and Threads at Not Average Goat. We do have a website too called notyouraveragegoat.org. And you can actually, there's a contact, get in touch link where you can actually send me a message directly through the website, or you can even email me at nyagpodcast@gmail.com. So Not Your Average Goat podcast, but just the abbreviation nyagpodcast@gmail.com. And that's if you want to be a guest. Again, always looking for guests either to round out season 3 or even to start on season 4. I would love to actually get more into like this constant flow of episodes versus kind of saying, okay, we're going to do 12 episodes this year, then 12 next year. But it is a lot of work. And I'm also on LinkedIn, Teisha Gillespie, which is a mouthful. And I'll spell it out because it's not quite the normal name. So it's Teisha, Teisha, and then Gillespie, Gillesp as in Paul, IE. And you can actually find me on LinkedIn as well. I also do kind of, career coaching, sometimes disability coaching, really helping to build that confidence and reviewing resumes. And, it's not like a service or like a paid consulting at all. So most of the time I really just looking to help empower and elevate others, especially people who belong to marginalized groups, might have disabilities themselves, might be dealing with mental health disorders. And so if any of that resonates with you, please definitely feel free to reach out.
Amazing. Yes, definitely reach out. There's just kindness pouring out of her.
Oh, thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much for being on. And I love talking with you this morning.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Megan, for having me.
Yeah.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the More Than Anxiety podcast. Before you go, be sure to subscribe and leave a review so others can easily find this resource as well. And of course, if you're ready to feel calm, to stop overthinking and have a lot more fun, you can go to the show notes, click the link, and talk to me about coaching. I'll talk to you soon.